sorry this isn't quite so formal as normal. I actually recorded this lecture, a really long, good version of this lecture, and then it just didn't save. So anyways, it didn't save because my file apparently was full of videos, because I'm still been saving them from last year. So anyway, so I've been recording for like the last week, and apparently it hasn't actually been recording. So story, anyways, whatever. So let's look at this healthy relationships. There's a lot of information in here that is very much for co-worker relationships and patient worker relationships within the healthcare field, but there's a lot of this just good everyday sense in here too. And so we'll just kind of go over it so you can follow along with your notes. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything, just follow along with me. It says no relationship is ever perfect. Many end because people don't communicate well and they mismanage conflicts. Biggest thing in healthcare, I would say one of the most important things is communication. Not just for the sake of avoiding conflict, but just for the sake of avoiding problems all the way around. I mean, we've already talked about that, but man, you cannot communicate enough in healthcare. I'm sorry.
Faith Taylor, if you're in the building, please come to the office. Faith Taylor, please report to the office. Mr. Bettis or Mr. Looper, please call the office. Mr. Bettis or Mr. Looper, please call the office.
I'm sorry, I'm having to do this after school, so it gets a little bit busier. Anyways, but yes, communication is, I don't know, you've got to have good communication skills to be in the healthcare field because people's lives depend on how well you communicate. And even though that sounds kind of silly, that really is the case. You know, if I give a medicine and I don't chart it or I don't tell somebody else, they come and give somebody the same medicine and it makes it a lethal dose. That's a communication problem on my end. And so communication, you can't do enough of it. You know, you communicate in your charting, in your documentation, you communicate, with your workers, you communicate with patients and let them know what's going on. So there's just communication all the way around is just, I don't know, you just can't do enough, like I said. And you guys watch as you go through clinicals and you see how people react with patients and act towards each other. Make some mental notes. Well, this guy was not very nice to this patient. I know I don't want to act like that. Or if I were that patient, I would feel horrible. Or, maybe you're like, wow, they handled that situation really good. Think about some of the things that they say and watch them interact. How do they put their hand on their back? Do they stand away? Does the patient talk to them and they don't listen? They're just too busy writing, while the patient is talking. Like, what's going on? Make a note of how well do they communicate? Like, what are they, I don't know, look at it, assess their communication skills. Think about how you can make yours better, or maybe take in some pointers from them. But 9 times out of 10, and you guys would probably agree, conflict is really a matter of not communicating something or communicating it in the wrong way. Think about anything you've ever gotten mad at about, like over a text, or somebody did something and sent you a text and you took it the wrong way, or maybe they wrote it and it didn't turn out correctly, or maybe autocorrect put in some crazy word that made you think something else, and I don't know, so much of what we do depends on how we talk to people, how we relate to them, how we communicate. And conflict erupts because either a misunderstanding took place or the wrong tone was used. My husband and I have gotten in many a fight, not just because of something that was said, but how it was said. And that's what, that's something I always come up with. It's not what you said, it's that you yelled, or whatever. You guys get an idea of that. It says people of all ages can learn how to build and maintain healthy relationships, and that's true. My child is constantly learning. She's not even 2, but she's constantly learning about, what does a good relationship look like, okay? I don't bite people, or I get in trouble, or they get mad at me, or, if I hit somebody because I'm mad, like I'm gonna get a spanking, or I'm gonna have to sit in the corner, or whatever the repercussion is. So she's learning how to do that. And I'm telling you, I mean, my child already knows a lot about how to communicate. She's learning how to use words. She's, she can point. I mean, even very young, she always loved to play with lip gloss. And so she'd point at the lip gloss and she'd say, point to her lips, and point in my purse, and point to her lips. She knew that she could communicate with me that way, even though she couldn't say any words yet. Sign language, another example, it's communicating. And that's another thing my child learned. I taught her early was to tell me when she was full or when she was all finished. And so I still do that. If I say all finished with anybody, I tend to do the hand motions. She could tell me if she wanted more. Although her hand motion, this is more, but her hand motion was a little bit different, but I understood what it meant. It was her take on it. The quality of relationships in the workplace has a significant impact on the quality of your care and how much you can get done. Better communication, better care. Even for the patient, even if they're not actually getting better care, they will have a better perception of the care. The more you let people in on, the more information you give them, the more you communicate, the better they're going to feel about your job as a nurse or as a physician or as a phlebotomist or whatever. The more if I go into a phlebotomist, let's say I go in and have some labs done, if they don't say a word to me and they just stick me, it may be the best needle stick ever. But if they don't say a word to me, I'm going to talk about how horrible they were. But if I go in and they're very friendly and they tell me what they're going to do, they tell me how many tubes they're going to take, they tell me that it's going to hurt, and even if it hurts really bad, and, I'm like, oh, well, at the end of the day, I'm going to say, she was really nice. Like, I mean, it did hurt, but she was really nice, and you're going to feel better coming out. You're going to have a better idea of the worker being the patient, even though the care wasn't actually better, it was perceived as better. Anyway, not that it's all about perception. Don't hear me say that, because there's a lot more to things than what they seem. But that is, customer service wise, that's really important. It says there's a set of skills that people can learn and practice to maintain a healthy relationship. 1, be comfortable with who you are and have confidence. The more comfortable you are in your abilities, the more confident you are, the more capable you're going to come off to people. So, can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but you're just going to be more presentable. And people are going to want that. Job interviews, I can't tell you, go in and be confident. You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to go on and on about yourself, but you want to be confident in the things that you do. If I go into an interview, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I was the best nurse at blah, 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 or I did this. I'm going to say, I worked for 4 years, and this is what I did. I was in charge of 3 patients. I did conscious sedations. I managed blah, blah, blah. But I'm not going to go in and say, I was the best nurse ever. I can do, and exaggerate. And there's something very different in being confident. And you guys know, people who are confident versus people who are arrogant. And typically the people who are the most arrogant are actually probably the least confident. And so it's kind of, you have to, sometimes you're walking on eggshells when you're around people who are very arrogant, because their confidence can be crushed because it's really pretty weak. Anyway. Number 2, respect each other. Number 3, accept others for who they are and not who they aren't. Don't expect everybody to do things the way that you do them. You can't expect everybody to be like you. And the sooner you learn that, the better your life will be, and the less stressful and the less conflict you'll have to deal with. Accept others for who they are and not who they aren't. Be content with who people are. Don't be angry because they don't act a certain way or they don't do something that you think they need to do. This is good marriage advice too. Number 4, communication should be open, clear, and honest. Yeah, I'm not saying in every situation you have to give every single detail. That's not the case. And in healthcare, that's definitely not the case. I may know how sick a patient is or what's going on, but it may not be my job to tell. That may be the physician's place. Now, I'm gonna seek to do my best ethically, but I'm gonna give the opportunity to that physician first or whoever's job it is. Recognize when there's a conflict and manage it without violence. Always good advice. Do things to show caring and appreciation for one another. The more you do for people and the more encouraging you are, the quicker they are to forgive, the quicker they are to move past whatever it is that you're dealing with. 7, trust each other. And then 8, surround yourself with people who support you and your ideas. I'm not telling you not to be friends with people who don't support you, but I am saying that let the people who you're closest to be people who encourage you, not people who tear you down. If you have people who are bringing you down all the time, sure, they need people who can encourage them as well, but they don't have to be your closest friends. So, if healthy relationships increase your energy for other things in your life, can inspire you rather than drain you. Probably some of you guys have been in relationships where you have felt extremely, you have people, there's people in your life who suck the life out of you. There's people in my life like that. And do I spend time with them? Yes, I want to be a positive influence for them. But I'm not going to pour myself out for those people who are just going to suck the life out of me. I'm not going to do it. That's not something that, I don't know, it's not worth my energy to do that. And you'll have people, every job has got them, that one person who complains about everything, gripes about everything, is always unhappy, wants to make everybody else unhappy. You probably had that at school. And yeah, you need to be their friend, but you don't have to be their best friend. And just don't let them drain you like that. It's never a good idea to completely wrap yourself up in your job to the exclusion of your family and friends. If you guys remember, we talked about burnout last year, and this is a big thing with burnout, is people get so wrapped up in their job. They bring it home. They bring all that, the difficulties that they've dealt with all day, the stress. They bring it home, act that out within their home and their family, and then, ruin relationships at home because of things that are going on at work. It's not do that. You have to learn to separate yourself. And it takes time and effort and practice, but you can do that. It is doable. If something tells you that something's not right in a workplace relationship, listen. Talk with someone you trust other than the person you have a problem with. It's always a good idea to have a third party, somebody who is not going to be biased and can tell you what you really think. So, and you can probably think of that person, but it's always a good idea to do that. To have somebody who's going to tell you the truth, whether it's good or bad. Men and women handle conflict with different styles. Now, these are not, I don't mean for these to be stereotyping, but just very generally speaking, women are typically more likely to raise concerns or problems, want to talk about what's going on. They're going to want you to listen. Men, on the other hand, are more likely to avoid it. They're going to downplay the conflict. They don't want to, whatever they're feeling, they're not necessarily going to want to talk about it. Now, my husband is not like that at all. He will talk about anything and everything, even way more than me. He has to pull stuff out of me. It kind of goes the other way. So not everybody's like that. But typically, especially in healthcare, you'll go in and a woman will tell you 20 different things that are hurting on her. But you'll go into a man's home who's just had knee surgery, and he's like, no, I'm not taking my medicine. I'm not hurting that bad. He can't even talk. He's hurting so bad. And so I had a guy who had a knee replacement like that. I'm like, even if you're not hurting before your exercises, you need to take your pain medicine before your exercises, at least for a few days after the surgery, just so that you can actually exercise. So it takes teaching, Communication. Professional relationships may end because people don't know how to communicate effectively, don't know how to manage conflicts. Managing conflict is something you're probably going to get asked about it in an interview. They're going to say, if you have a conflict with a coworker, how would you handle that? And you need to have a response for that. How would you handle that? What would you do? What would you say? Those are typical interview questions. Um, I would say even getting, fired or getting reprimanded at your job is typically a communication issue. Either expectations were not communicated or taken very well, or, maybe a lot of times you'll hear, well, I thought this, but they meant it this way. Well, it's really good to clear up any miscommunication. Communication and conflict resolution are skills that can be learned and practiced. Practice makes perfect, so it's not something that's just going to come out of the blue and you're going to be able to handle conflict amazingly after today's lecture. It's practice. It takes practice. Being able to communicate and work out conflicts respectfully will help you at home, with friends, at school, and on the job. And I've told you guys that before about myself at my last job. That was a big thing. If something went wrong, something wasn't right, I said, okay, let's figure out how to fix this. What do I need to do different? It says all relationships have some conflict, and conflict in and of itself is not bad. It's how we react that can be negative or destructive. Let me tell you guys a little life secret. It took me a long time to learn this, but if there's a conflict between you and another person, work, friends, marriage, whatever it is, family, if you will address the conflict, don't just bury it and pretend like it never happened, because eventually you're going to get mad about it again. If you'll go to that person and say, this is what you did that upset me, or, this is what I did, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. How can I make this better? Like, find something, because 9 times out of 10, conflict is not the problem of just one person in their relationship. It's both. It's a miscommunication, or somebody took something wrong that somebody else should have said different, or this person didn't think about this response, or whatever. It's almost always more than just one person's problem. So think back through whatever happened. What could you have done differently? What should you have not done? And focus on that first. If you'll go and say, okay, friend, I feel like there's been some tension. I got really upset with you when this and this and this happened, but I realized that, maybe I should have handled that differently, or, maybe you didn't mean it this way. Can you, explain what you meant when you said this? Or, what can I do different next time so that this won't happen, so that we won't get upset? Is there something that I did? If you'll go in with that, I'm willing to figure things out, I'm willing to change if I need to. You can just see it on their face. Their face will just shift from angry to, okay, and they'll just get calm, and so you can talk about it together. But if you go in with a demanding attitude, pointing or saying, you did this, you did that, why did you do this? If you go in with that kind of attitude, they're just going to get defensive and the conflict's never going to get resolved. But if you'll go in with knowing that I'm not a perfect person, they're not a perfect person, people make mistakes, I make mistakes, maybe I should have done something different too. If you'll go in with that attitude, I'm telling you, try it. Okay? I had a friend one time, I told her this because she was having issues with this other person. And she got into the conversation, and the first thing she said was, well, Katie, don't tell me to do this, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work if you don't give it a chance to. But I promise you, test it out and tell me that it doesn't make a huge difference. Anyway, that's my life skills moment for the day. So anyways, too much conflict is bad. Okay, so let me talk to you guys for a minute about relationships, like love relationships. Too much conflict is bad. If you argue all the time, if you're constantly fighting, if you're constantly mad at each other, if you're constantly upset because he did this or she did this, or if you're, whatever, it's not going, that conflict is not going anywhere. It's not ever gonna get better. Um, because if you're dating now, everybody's on their best behavior when you're dating. If you get married someday, everything in your relationship that isn't right, that annoys you, that makes you crazy, everything that that person does that you don't like, maybe they don't do something that you do want them to do. When you get married, those things like explode exponentially. So if maybe they, I don't know, maybe they're really selfish and they only do things for themselves.
Bradley Davis, if you're in the building, please come to the office. Bradley Davis, if you're in the building, please come to the office.
Maybe they're really selfish when you're dating and you're like, well, they're pretty selfish, but you know, that's fine, whatever. Telling you, when you get married, they're going to be like the most selfish person in the world is how it's going to seem. You know, if you argue all the time when you're dating, that arguing is going to be a billion times worse when you're married, because everybody's on their best behavior when you're dating. When you get married, it's a different ball game. You've got two people who are very imperfect, who are very selfish, because we're all selfish at some level. And when you put those two people in one house together, it's just trouble. I mean, there's going to be conflict. So if you don't handle conflict well when you're dating, how are you going to handle it when you're married and you can't even escape from that person because you're living together? So I don't know. That's my relationship sense for the day, but just know that whatever goes on dating wise explodes exponentially marriage wise. So if they do something that you're like, maybe I can live with that, but I'm not sure, you're probably not going to be able to live with it when you go to get married. But anyways, okay. It's okay and normal to have conflict as long as you have some skills in it. Oh, and let me, while we're talking about that, I won't go any further. If there's violence in your relationship, okay, if that person gets angry and acts like they might hit you or does hit you, or maybe they've just done a few things that you're like, oh, well, I'm not really sure, that's kind of weird, but maybe it's okay, you know, maybe they pushed you or shoved you or, I don't know, hurt you some other way, but it didn't really seem that bad. Marriage, again, those things get much worse. Everybody's on their best behavior when you're dating. So whatever they do when you're dating, if that gets a bazillion times worse when you're married, can you live with that? And while we're on that, if whoever you're with, if you're even with anybody, if they handle conflict with violence, you're going to have conflict in marriage. That's the nature of it. It's how you handle conflict, which is what really makes a marriage. A marriage isn't about feeling love and feeling whatever. It's about, in the end, it's really about how well you handle conflict. And so if they handle dating conflict with any type of violence, they're going to handle marriage conflict with more severe violence. I promise you, if they are unfaithful when you're dating, it's not going to be any different when you're married. It's not going to be any different when you're married. Maybe they have some kind of dramatic life change. Not saying it will never happen. I wouldn't say that. But most of the time it just gets worse. So, okay, that's my relationship sense. I'm sorry, I know that's probably meddling a little bit personally too much, but while we're talking about relationships, might as well. And if you're in a violent relationship, get help. Like, find somebody, go talk to your school counselor, go talk to somebody, because you need to get out of it, and you need to get out of it while you can. Okay, managing conflict. Be respectful when you have a problem with something the person is doing. Voice a complaint rather than criticism. So complaint means, hey, I noticed, when we were working on our project, I noticed you were sitting and not really doing anything. Can you come help with this? Okay, that's a good way to handle that. Criticism way to handle that is, Why aren't you helping this? You're not doing anything. You're an idiot. Okay, that's criticism. But if I suggest something that they do to help, because I make a mention that they're not actually doing anything, then that's more of a complaint. That's something that's constructive. Me telling them they're an idiot and why are you so stupid, that's criticism. Look at the two examples. It says, I get uncomfortable when your music is too loud and I can't concentrate. It gives them a why. Versus criticism. What's wrong with you? Don't you know that playing loud music is immature? Okay, that's going to make them defensive, and that's going to make them want to turn their music up louder. Avoid name calling, blaming, put downs, and using the words always and never. I'm horrible at that. My husband is like, you always use the word always, or, and never, and that's not the case. Like, it's never this, whatever, anyway. Avoid being defensive or flipping the script. So somebody comes to you with something, you don't have to take it so personal. You don't have to get defensive. Just listen to their complaint, take a few moments to gather your thoughts, and then speak. You don't have to go crazy just because somebody has a complaint against you. Again, nobody's perfect. Everybody's not going to like you. Everybody's not going to want to work with you. Everybody's not going to want to be your friend. Okay? That's just life. There's nothing you can do about it. So you don't have to be defensive. Especially with work. It's usually not a personal problem. It's usually either a problem on their end or, it's just something about the way you're doing something that would be easy to change. Use good listening skills. Make sure that you understand what everyone is saying, especially when discussing a difficult issue. Remember, we talked about therapeutic communication. So they say something, and you say, okay, so you're saying that it makes you upset when I do this. That clarifies. Okay, well, do you have suggestions on how I should do that differently? Or what if I, blah, 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 whatever. Use your therapeutic listening skills. Okay, let them know that you're listening. Build a foundation of positive feelings with one another. Tell each other what you appreciate and look out for each other. More positive than negative interaction. Okay, try to, today, when you're at school, okay, I want you, before you say anything negative, or maybe if you catch yourself saying something negative, go back and let's try to say 5 positive things for every negative thing that you say. Just try it. See what happens. When you catch yourself being defensive, overly critical, or blaming, just stop. Take a big deep breath, maybe step out of the conversation or step out of the situation for a minute and then move back to it. Do something to change the tone of an argument or reduce the intensity. So I am horrible at saying like really awkward things in tense moments, and it like backfires. Nobody laughs. Everybody just stares at me like I'm an idiot, but whatever. Yeah, just what can you do? Maybe if things get really heated and you say, okay, wait, let's go back to the beginning. What were we originally talking about? And make sure that you're staying on subject and just take a deep breath to help calm you down. Soften what you're saying to make it sound less hostile. Okay? Me telling someone you need to get up and do some work is a lot different than me saying, hey, will you come help us do some work? Will you come help us with this? Big difference there. The second one is going to make them want to help a lot more than the first one. Debrief the conflict. That just means talk to someone on the outside and kind of tell them what all happened and ask for input. They don't need to make a judgment. They just ask them for input. Well, how do you think I handled that? Is that not what I should have said? Sit down and talk after an argument. So have a conversation afterwards. Don't just leave angry. Take responsibility for your role in the problem. Like I said, say, well, what could I have done differently? Or maybe I should have handled this like this. I'm sorry that I got so upset. I'm sorry that in the beginning whatever. Discuss what both of you can do to make it better. Okay, anger. Anger is a normal and natural feeling. People get angry, especially patients, because they don't feel good. And it makes, when you don't feel good, It makes your temper only last a short time. It's what you do with your anger that makes the difference. We all have different ways. Some of you guys have different ways. Okay, I cannot speak when I'm angry. Nothing comes out of my mouth, and I sound like an idiot because I'll say things that either one, don't make any sense, or I just say nothing at all. When I get frustrated, that's what happens. Anger can, one, wound you and your relationship, or get you fired. Not something you want to do. So don't let your anger run your thoughts and your actions. Anger can be so blinding that it keeps you from seeing another's point of view or your own role in the conflict. Sometimes it does give you a horrible point of view. It makes you not be able to look at things from someone else's perspective. It can lead you to say things you later regret. Guilty. It can also invite violence. Anger, you know that anger is getting out of hand when either person is overheated or out of control. Maybe they're just really angry, their face is really red, they're huffing and puffing, they're starting to get violent, or their fists are shaking. That's a sign. Everybody needs to split up, take a little breather before you come back and try to finish up managing it. You're arguing in a way that's going nowhere. So nobody's going to change their mind. Everybody's angry. It's not getting anywhere. Then you just need to be done until everybody can think about it some more. 3, you're getting louder and angrier by the minute, so it's escalating. Not a good sign. Either of you is saying extremely negative things that you can't take back. Okay, I'm guilty of that as well. You appear at risk of coming to a physical argument or violence. Nip it right there. Ground rules for dealing with it. When it's getting out of control, just be done. You can come back to it at a later time, but if it's getting out of control, getting out of hand, be done with it right there. Take time out and remove yourself from the conflict. Never block someone from leaving or follow him or her. Okay, that escalates things, makes people defensive, makes them freak out. Don't do that. Once you're away from the situation, do things to soothe yourself and don't engage in negative self-talk. Oh my gosh, this is my nemesis, is this negative self-talk. I don't know if any of you guys are like this, but I'm horrible at having entire conversations with myself, especially if I'm like driving or something. I have a whole conversation with myself and this person that I'm mad at, and I will come up with all these things that they'll say, and then I say things back to them, and then I imagine them saying these other things, and by the end of my drive, I'm so worked up, I can't even think about anything. And what's crazy is that other person is probably never going to say any of those things I dreamed up all of these responses to. And so I've spent all this time being mad and working myself up for absolutely nothing. Maybe that's just a girl thing, or maybe it's just a me thing, I don't know. But that's not a healthy thing to do. It's said, we talked about earlier, don't expect people to be who they aren't. And don't expect them to do things that they haven't done. When you start putting words and actions on people that you think they're going to do, and it makes you angry at them for something they didn't even do, and maybe they hadn't even thought about. It's just silly, but I'm horrible at that. Wait to reconvene until you're both feeling normal again. Don't bring up the conflict again. Once you've had it out, once you've managed the conflict, don't bring it up anymore. You're done with it. You need to move past it and don't bring it up. If you still keep coming up with angry feelings about it, then maybe you need to discuss it again. Use communication skills to be sure you really understand. Like I said, you can use those leading statements, ask them to go on, clarify what they say. Get help if you have reason to believe that you're in over your head, you can't handle things alone. Maybe you need a third party. Maybe you need a person to come in and kind of like referee between you. You're irritable all the time and can't get a handle on it. So maybe you're just angry, period. You're just angry. Go see your counselor at your school. That's what they're there for. The fighting is intense and frequent. Okay? If you're in a relationship, at least a dating relationship, and you're finding that conflict, or maybe a friend relationship, you're finding that you're fighting all the time, just get out of it. Maybe maybe you can come back to it later, but be done with it, because it doesn't, when you're in the situation, it's really hard to see what's really going on, because you're so involved. There's physical violence of any type. Get out. And you see a cycle of angry outbursts followed by feelings of remorse. So somebody gets really, really angry, and then they're like, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm so sorry. It's a cycle. There's something going on else with that person that they need to go see somebody about. Guys, I know this, it seems kind of silly in healthcare, but communication and having good relationships with people that's the basics of healthcare. You've got to have it. So anyways, I hope you guys, at least maybe gave you guys some things to think about. I want you to do the healthy relationships paper, but it's just a discussion activity, so discuss it in class. What are some things that are most important to you? Anyways, I hope you guys are doing good. I hope your clinicals are going well. I know ours are they're really enjoying it. So anyways, if you guys have anything, just let me know.